I'll be honest. I never thought the size of my apartment would become the punchline to someone else's joke, least of all the woman I planned to marry. But I guess that's how you learn the truth sometimes. Not in the quiet conversations or the difficult ones behind closed doors, but in the sharp laughter of people who think you're not listening. The apartment in question? It was modest. One bedroom, brick walls, hardwood floors worn in all the right places. A place with history, not flash. I'd lived there for nearly a decade, long before I met Rachel. She always said it had charm, and she wasn't wrong. It wasn't fancy, not by New York standards, but it was mine. At least, that's what she thought. We met 2 years ago at a charity event, something about literacy for underserved youth. She worked in branding for a luxury fashion house. Tall, elegant, always 3 steps ahead of everyone in the room. I was wearing the same suit I'd worn for the last 5 years, and she still gave me her number. I remember thinking, maybe she sees something more. At first, she loved the apartment. Or said she did. Called it cozy. Said it was refreshing to be with someone who wasn't trying to impress her with penthouses or overpriced art. I cooked for her on that tiny stove. We ate takeout on the floor the first time she stayed over because I hadn't bought a proper dining table yet. She laughed and said it felt like a scene from a romantic indie movie. That laugh, soft, real, stuck with me. Somewhere along the way, that laugh changed. The first time I noticed it was at her office holiday party. She introduced me as Ethan, my Brooklyn creative. The word Brooklyn sounded like an apology. Her coworkers smiled like I was a puppy she'd rescued from a shelter. I shrugged it off. These people didn't matter. What mattered was her hand in mine on the way home, her head on my shoulder in the Uber, the way she whispered, "I love you," like she meant it. But things shifted after we got engaged. It was a quiet proposal. Just the two of us, Sunday morning, coffee still brewing. I knelt by the window with a simple ring and shaky hands. She cried, said yes, said she didn't need anything fancy. "This is us," she whispered. But a few weeks later, during brunch with her friends, I started to notice the gap between her world and mine widening. They talked about destination weddings and couture gowns, spa packages for the bridesmaids. I mentioned maybe we could have a small gathering at my family's farmhouse upstate. Rachel's fork froze midair. "Babe," she said, laughing, "they don't even have cell service up there." They laughed. I smiled. I told myself not to read into it. But the worst of it came one Friday evening, when she invited her friends over for drinks. I'd just gotten back from a long day at the architecture firm. My hands were still stained with graphite and ink. I'd been sketching all day, something personal I hadn't told anyone about yet. A new project I was pouring my heart into. My dream, tucked inside my worn leather notebook. The girls had already taken over the living room. Wine bottles open, heels off, music playing low from someone's phone. I walked in, and Rachel gave me that smile. The one she reserved for when I was useful, like an accessory she wasn't quite sure matched her outfit. "Ladies," she announced, "this is Ethan, my fiancé. Yes, he really does live here." The laughter that followed wasn't cruel. Not loudly. Just the kind that dances on the edge of mockery, wrapped in silk and wine-soaked teeth. One of them, Holly, I think, looked around the apartment, raised her eyebrows, and said, "It's like an IKEA showroom for minimalists. So tiny and quaint." Quaint. I nodded, forcing a grin. "I'm going to get changed," I said, already halfway to the bedroom. But before I could close the door, I heard Rachel, voice lowered just enough to pretend I wasn't meant to hear it. "He insists on staying here," she said. "I mean, it's not terrible, but come on. I'm about to be someone's wife, not a grad student's roommate." More laughter. The door clicked shut behind me. I didn't say anything that night. I didn't sleep, either. I just sat at the edge of the bed, staring at the brick wall I used to love. It used to feel like stability. Now it just felt like a punchline. She had no idea, of course. No idea who I really was. I let her believe what she wanted. That I was a struggling designer with an eye for clean lines and secondhand furniture. That I had no inheritance, no legacy, just a little apartment and a big heart. What she didn't know was that I'd bought the building 3 years before I ever met her. All 6 floors, 12 units. The brownstone across the street, too. Paid for in cash after selling the rights to a patented design I'd co-developed years back. A modular framework for sustainable housing. No one ever knew I was part of that deal. I didn't want the attention. I wanted freedom. So I lived simply. Chose quiet over flash. Built my wealth in silence. And now the woman I planned to spend my life with was mocking my life right to my face. That was the moment something shifted in me. Not anger, not even sadness. Clarity. The kind that creeps in when the lights go low and you hear the truth in someone's laughter. And I knew I had a decision to make. But first, I needed to show her exactly where she was standing. The next morning, Rachel acted like nothing had happened. She kissed my cheek, made coffee, and breezed through the apartment like we hadn't both stood on opposite sides of an invisible crack forming in the floor beneath us. I watched her flutter around, pouring oat milk into her mug, asking if I could grab dry cleaning on my way home. I nodded, said yes, like always. But something in me had stepped back. Over the next few days, I paid closer attention. To her, to myself, to the way we'd quietly shifted into two different rhythms. She was all curated perfection, living for moments Instagram-worthy. And me? I'd gotten too comfortable letting her believe the version of me she could manage. Maybe that was my mistake. Maybe I gave her too much space to imagine who I was, instead of showing her. So, I decided to remind myself. Saturday morning, I walked down to the super's office in the basement. Miguel looked up from his crossword puzzle and grinned. "Mr. Hale," he said, standing up. "Didn't expect to see you today. Had to check in on Unit 5C. The tenant mentioned a leak last week." He nodded, already grabbing the spare keys. I didn't have to do these things. We had a management team, but I liked being hands-on. I liked knowing every creak in the floorboards, every odd sound the boiler made on cold nights. I'd spent years walking these halls. To Rachel, this was a stopgap apartment. To me, it was legacy, something I'd built out of nothing. After checking the leak, I climbed up to the roof. My favorite spot. It wasn't much, just a few old chairs, a weathered table, and views that stretched over Brooklyn like a secret only I was in on. I sat there, notebook in hand, sketching. Nothing elaborate, just shapes, ideas. Breathing room. My phone buzzed. A text from Rachel. "Brunch with the girls. Don't wait up." Of course. By Sunday, I had a plan. "Hey," I said casually over dinner. "I was thinking we should throw an engagement party. Just something small. Here." Rachel blinked. "Here? In the apartment?" "Yeah, just a few people. Friends, family. Keep it intimate." She laughed, short, surprised. "You seriously want to cram everyone in this shoebox? Ethan, come on." I raised an eyebrow. "What's wrong with this place?" She hesitated. "Nothing, it's just, it's not exactly party material." I set my fork down. "That's funny. You used to love it here." Her smile faltered for a beat, then returned. "I do. I just meant we deserve something nicer. Something a little more elevated." Elevated. That word clanged around in my head like an echo in a stairwell. "I'll handle the details," I said quietly. "Just be ready next Saturday. Dress nice." She raised an eyebrow. "You're serious?" "Very." The week that followed, I moved like a shadow. Phone calls, quiet meetings, a quick stop at my attorney's office. Some old contacts from my development firm owed me favors. A local catering company, a jazz trio I used to sketch during open mic nights. They remembered me. Everyone was happy to help. By Friday, the rooftop was transformed. String lights, velvet drapes brushing the stairwell walls. A polished wood bar that hadn't been there a week ago. Warm uplighting, hand-picked wines, tapas trays, and a custom cake that read "To New Beginnings" in cursive gold. Rachel had no idea. She just thought we were going to dinner. I met her at the door, dressed in my best navy suit, the one she'd once said made me look like someone important. "You look incredible," I said. She smiled, already softening. "Where are we going?" "You'll see." We climbed the stairs together, her heels clicking against the wood. The closer we got to the roof, the more she slowed. "Wait, are we?" I opened the door. Music spilled into the stairwell. Laughter. The clinking of glasses. A dozen familiar faces turned toward us, smiling. My parents. A couple of my old professors. A few tenants. Even Miguel, in a button-down shirt I'd never seen him wear before. Rachel froze. "This is our rooftop?" she whispered. I nodded. "I thought we'd celebrate here. Where it all started." She stepped out, stunned. The space shimmered. Soft jazz floated through the night air. The Manhattan skyline twinkled like applause. "I had no idea this was up here," she murmured. "You never asked." She turned to me, something unreadable in her expression. "How did you pull this off?" I took her hand. "It's easier when you own the building." Silence. She blinked. What? I smiled. Yeah, I own it. This one. The brownstone across the street, too. She laughed, confused. You're joking. No, I said, watching her closely. I just never thought it mattered. You said you liked that I wasn't flashy. She paused. Why wouldn't you tell me that? Why would I need to? Her mouth opened, then closed. Around us, people mingled, oblivious. I watched her stare out at the view, trying to rearrange the version of me she'd constructed in her head. Finally, she looked at me. I'm sorry, she said. About the other night. I didn't mean to make fun. I didn't know. I know. The music played on. The lights flickered softly against the skyline. But something had already begun to dim between us. Because now she knew the truth. And I knew hers. The night ended late. Rachel played the role she'd mastered. Charming, elegant, the perfect fiancée. She smiled through stories, held my hand for photos, kissed my cheek when the cake was cut. But I could feel it. Her mind wasn't at the party anymore. It was doing math, calculating years and dollars and decisions, rebuilding the image she'd had of me from the ground up. By the time the last guest left, the rooftop was quiet again. Just the two of us, standing under the string lights, now swaying gently in the night breeze. She turned to me. You really own this building? I nodded. 3 years now. Bought it under a holding company. I didn't want the attention. Just wanted to live simple. She stepped closer, arms folded. Why didn't you ever tell me? You never asked, I said, and I meant it. You assumed. She flinched at that, just slightly, but it was there. You let me think you were struggling, she said. That this place was all you could afford. Would it have changed anything if I had told you sooner? There was a pause. I don't know, she said. And that was it. That was the crack. The small, undeniable proof that love, real love, the kind that sees you fully, wasn't what we had. She didn't fall for me. She fell for who I let her believe I was. And when that version turned out to have deeper roots, more strength, more stability, she didn't know how to hold it. I wanted her to be proud. What I got was surprise wrapped in unease. That weekend, she started dropping comments. Casual at first. You know, we could easily flip this building. Make a fortune. Or, have you thought about moving uptown? You could get something more fitting. More fitting. She wanted the man she could explain to her friends. Not the one who challenged their assumptions. Then came the real slip. We were walking back from dinner with one of her friends, Holly again, when she said it, half laughing, maybe a little drunk. Honestly, I'm still shocked you stayed in that apartment. If I had your money, I'd have been long gone. But I guess you like pretending to be one of the commoners. She laughed. Holly laughed. I didn't. That night, I asked her if she really meant it. She shrugged. It was a joke. But do you think that? That I'm pretending? That this life I built isn't enough unless it looks a certain way? She hesitated, and that was answer enough. I slept on the couch. The next morning, I made coffee, sat down at my desk, and wrote her a letter. Not a breakup note, not an accusation. Just the truth. My truth. I told her about how I grew up without much. How this building was the first thing I ever owned. How I'd spent my 20s learning to make something out of nothing, not for applause, but for peace. How I had always believed love didn't require performance, just presence. I ended with one sentence. If this life isn't enough for you, then neither am I. I left the letter on the nightstand. When she woke up, she didn't cry, didn't yell. She just read it, folded it carefully, and asked me if I was serious. I told her I was. She moved out 2 days later, packed her designer bags into a Blacktown car, and didn't look back. I watched from the window, not bitter, not angry, just quiet. People always think the betrayal is the lie, but sometimes it's the laughter. The moment you realize someone didn't see your life as worthy until they saw the price tag. I stayed in the apartment, repainted the walls, bought a new couch, left the rooftop as it was, a reminder. A few months later, I rented out the top floor to a young couple just starting out. He's a teacher, she's a nurse. They love the place. They told me it feels like home. I smiled and said, yeah, it is. Sometimes I pass by that old restaurant Rachel loved, the one where she used to hold court with her friends. I wonder if she ever tells the story. If she still laughs about the guy with the tiny apartment. If she does, I hope she tells it right. Because that tiny apartment? It was mine. Every inch. Every brick. Every quiet moment where love could have grown, but didn't. And I learned something in that silence. Not all wealth is in what you own. Sometimes, it's in what you let go of.